This is it. This is what you're here for. The DJI O4 Air unit. It's finally releasing. And like any DJI product release, it is full of some, whoa, I can't believe they did that, technical choices, unbelievable performance, and some pretty annoying and frustrating design decisions that, well, most of you are going to forgive when you see how good this freaking thing is. I'm Joshua Bardwell. You're going to learn something. And the first thing you got to know as you watch this video is that this is not just one, but two products being released as part of this release. The first is what most people would call the O4 Air unit, which is this one, the big boy, and then what normal people would call the Air Unit Lite or the Air Unit Mini, which is this guy. But that's not how DJI, your naming convention is so freaking confusing. This here is the Air Unit Pro, and this here is the Air unit, just the Air unit. No one's going to call it that. But anyway, what makes this so freaking exciting is that this guy here, the little one, 1S to 3S battery voltage, single board solution. We're going to put it on the scale and see how much it weighs. This is the first time DJI has even acknowledged the existence of like a DJI Air unit on a micro drone. This is really exciting, and I can't wait to get it on a quadcopter and test it out. Although I will say in this video, we're going to save that. We're going to talk about the specs and we're going to weigh it and stuff. But the actual putting it on a drone and flying it and seeing how it performs, we're going to save that for a second video and focus most of our attention on the Pro in this one. The Lite version of the O4, and I'm just going to call it the Lite and the O4, or maybe the O4 Pro. I can't just call it the O4 Air unit and assume that you're going to know that I'm not talking about the Pro. The Lite version has a 1/2 inch sensor, still 4K resolution, still 12 megapixels. It's just a much smaller sensor, and we'll do some flight comparisons in time to see how the image quality compares. Like the O3 Air unit, both of the new O4 Air units support built-in image stabilization and record gyro data so they can be used with the open source and free image stabilization software gyroflow. Now, when we say that those are 4K cameras, that doesn't mean that they're going to transmit 4K footage over the air to your goggles. There isn't a FPV system that does that as of today. It's just too much data to transmit over the air with the low latency that FPV systems require. What that means is that it's going to record 4K video in the onboard storage, or in the case of the Pro unit, to an SD card that you can insert into the Air unit. What they transmit to the goggles on your face is 1080p resolution at 100 frames per second. And this is true for the O3 as well as the new O4s. What about latency? Latency has traditionally been a weak spot of the DJI FPV system. DJI and Walksnail, the way that they transmit data means that the latency is higher than systems like HD0 and analog, but the image quality is better. That's the trade-off that they've made. And not only is the latency higher, but the latency is inconsistent. It kind of goes like when you're like watching a YouTube video and then there's some buffering and the sort of slows down. That's happening in the background anytime you're flying a DJI or Walksnail video system. What this means is that on the bench, under ideal conditions, when the goggles and the video transmitter are very close together, you'll see a relatively consistent and relatively low latency. But as soon as you go out and you fly away and you start flying around and the signal gets weaker, that latency goes up and that latency jumps around. And that makes the systems worse for racing, both because the latency is higher and because it's inconsistent. Walksnail has addressed this with a racing mode where they drop the resolution down to 540p, and that gets you a lower and a more consistent, although not perfectly consistent, latency. And DJI has followed suit. For once, here's something that Walksnail did legitimately first before DJI, and I'm going to guess that DJI will have done it better but we'll see when we actually fly it. The O4 Air units both have a racing mode. And DJI advertises this racing mode as having a quote-unquote stable latency at 15 to 20 milliseconds. Notice they said stable, they didn't say constant. We would really like a fixed constant latency, but it's just not possible to do that with the way that DJI and Walksnail transmit their data. So we've got a stable latency between 15 and 20 milliseconds, and unfortunately, we kind of just have to take DJI's word for that because unlike Walksnail, which still reports the latency on screen, so you can see it while you're flying, and you could actually even record it to a file on SD card and graph it, DJI doesn't report that latency and doesn't provide you any means of knowing what it is in flight. Now, we could take these goggles and test them on the bench, and what we would see, I'm 100% sure, is that the latency on the bench is within their stated numbers. That's always been the case, and I assume it's the case here. But it doesn't really matter, because as soon as we go out and start flying, that latency is going to start changing, and there's just no way for us to know what it is. I'm going to fly it. I'm going to tell you how it feels, but we kind of just have to take their word, or not, that the latency is between 15 and 20 milliseconds while we're flying. Let's talk size and weight. The Pro Air unit and camera is going to come in at 34 grams. The Lite or standard one is going to come in at 9 grams. That's pretty impressive. How does that stack up compared to things like the Walksnail 1S video transmitter or the HD0 video transmitter? The Walksnail 1S Lite kit, which includes video transmitter and camera, comes in at just under 8 grams. So the DJI is a little heavier, but not that much. It's pretty close. And the HD0 Whoop Lite comes in at 4.5 grams plus another couple grams for the camera. A little bit lighter still, but kind of in the ballpark. This is seriously viable for like 1S Whoop, well, digital Whoop installs. It's still nowhere near as light as an analog build, and it probably never will be. But this is totally, like, people have been making naked O3 Air units and putting them on 85 millimeter drones, and they fly okay, but gosh, it's a lot of hassle. This is like totally in the ballpark of what you need. And given DJI's like ability to build like solid hardware that takes hits and doesn't break, I would bet that this is going to turn out to be the most durable 1S. I hate to say it, but the Walksnail 1S VTX doesn't have a great reputation for reliability. It takes hits, eventually it dies, and then Walksnail's like, oh, mail it back to China and we'll fix it for you. And people are like, yeah, thanks, no. And HC0 is a little bit better. Like, they've really focused on durability and reliability, but it's just hard to imagine anybody beating DJI in that respect. We'll find out as it hits the market, and maybe I'll be wrong, but that's my bet as of today. The interface for both of the new O4 VTXs is identical to the old ones. The wiring is exactly the same. And in fact, you should be able to just literally unplug an O3 and plug it into an O4, or if you're feeling brave, oh my God, yes. I thought there would be solder points, but no, there's an actual plug. I can't believe it. DJI, thank you. There's a plug. You should be able to unplug an O3 and plug in either of these Air units and just have it drop in and work. So that's good. However, there are going to be some quirks that will make dropping in an O4 on an existing O3 not as simple as you would wish it to be. For one thing, the big VTX, the Pro VTX, has switched from a single antenna to dual antennas. Well, it's not quite true. The O3 always had 2 antenna connectors, but they shipped it with a single antenna with 2 elements inside it, so you mounted it like a single antenna. But the O4, the Pro version of the O4, has 2 separate antennas. And of course, you could swap it out. You could literally just take an O3 antenna and swap it out. I don't see why you wouldn't be able to, but probably you're going to get the best performance with the factory antenna. So you're going to have some 3D printed mounts. The small one just has this little whip antenna, so well, it's going to be easy to mount, so that's something. But the real kicker is the camera. They're freaking killing me. They're freaking killing me with this. Look what they've done with the camera mounting. The spacing of these holes is completely inconsistent with any other FPV camera that has ever existed. And how wide is it? Is it the same width? I don't know. Let's find out. I bet they made it wider or some other bullshit. Let's find out. Moment of truth, ladies and gentlemen. Moment of truth. Here is the camera. Here is the AOS 5, which is sized for a standard 19 millimeter camera. This thing is 20 millimeters. It simply will not go. Now, Thankfully, Chris Rosser is already on it and has got some 3D printed parts that we can use to mount this camera. But if you were hoping to just take your O4 Air unit and just pop it into your frame, well, if you have a frame with 3D printed bumpers and it's made for the O3, it might work, but it might not. And yes, I know manufacturers will have updated frames and updated whatever they need to do in the next few months, but there's going to be a transition period and it's going to be frickin' annoying. And it's just one of those things DJI does where they like, oh, we've got this new thing. It's amazing. It's truly fantastic. And look at all these nice things we did for you. And also we did a few super annoying things that just make you shake your fist to the sky and say, why DJI? So let's take a look in the goggle menu. We will go to transmission. And the first thing I want to show you is that the transmit power on the O4 Air unit can be manually adjusted. On the O3 Air unit, you could change the channel, but the transmit power was always handled automatically. If we look at the transmission power options, we can see we can go up to 1200 milliwatts. DJI has probably done a pretty good job of managing the auto, so I'm going to leave it there for now. But we'll probably set it to 1200 milliwatts when we go out and fly, just to, obviously because more power is better. Here on channel mode, if I change the channel mode from auto to manual, which you can see I've already done, then I can change the bandwidth, and that 60 megahertz bandwidth is the new 60 megabit per second mode that the O4 offers to give you just a little better image quality. 40 megahertz was the old 50 megabit per second mode, 20 megahertz is 25 megabits per second, and 10 megahertz is 12 megabits per second, taking up less of the frequency space. If you fly with other pilots, you may want to use 20 megahertz so you're not taking up as much frequency space and stomping on them. Let's look at the camera settings, and I want to take a look at the video quality available. And the first thing I want to show you is any of these settings that are over 100 frames per second, that's only recorded on the Air unit. So the goggles have a 100 frame per second screen. So if I set this to 4K 120, I will record 4K 120 on the Air unit, but my goggles are only getting 60 frames per second. So basically they just drop every other frame. And that means that the latency for the 60 frame and the 120 frame per second modes is higher and is the same as each other. The lowest latency is going to be by choosing a 100 frame per second mode. It is interesting they let you choose 4K 100. Again, that doesn't mean you'll get 4K back to the goggles. The goggles are only 1080p 100, but it'll record 4K on the Air unit, downscale that to 1080p, and send it to the goggles. And that kind of seems like the best of both worlds. I'm pretty sure on the O3, you could only go to 2.7K 100. The O3 could only do 4K 60 or 4K 120, which is just 4K 60 over the air. So I'll leave this at 4K 100. We've also got 4K 60, 4K 50 for those doing PAL, I guess, and 4K 48 for those who want to do like 24 frame per second movie stuff, and 4K 30. 2.7K 120, again, that's going to be 60 frame per second latency, so worse latency. 2.7K 100, etc., and 1080p as well. I'm a little annoyed because I usually like to fly in 4:3 aspect ratio, but hang on, let me change it to 1080p 100. If we change it to 1080p 100, we can change the aspect ratio to 4:3 and look at the top and bottom of the screen. Look at the top and bottom of the screen and look what happens to the field of view. Do you see that the field of view has opened up a little bit? This camera is a native 4:3 sensor, so if you fly in 4:3 mode, you get the maximum field of view. And in fact, that's how I like to fly. I don't need to see that stuff off the sides. I want to see the maximum field of view. Sadly, if you've got it in 4:3 mode, the only 100 frame per second option you get is 1080p 100. You used to be able to fly with the O3 in 2.7K 100 4:3. You can't do that anymore. So basically, if you want the best latency, you're going to have to fly 1080p 100, or you're going to have to fly 16:9, or you're going to have to try racing mode, which we don't know what effects that'll have. I'm a little annoyed about that. All right, well, it's time to put this thing in the air and see how it actually performs when you fly it. For this test, I am standing in the usual location that I stand for all of my quote-unquote range tests. Of course, this is not a true range test, which would need to be done in open air without any obstacles, but I run these tests enough that we should have a sense of how this stacks up compared to things that have come before it. Okay, so we're at 60 megabits per second. Okay. Sorry. And first thing I want to do is just going to take a little loop around my property. and see how it holds bitrate as I fly. Specifically as I go behind the house here, not even a drop in output power, in megabits per second. Just holding 60 megabits per second perfectly. Holy crap, that's impressive. Are you gonna drop it all? Rock solid, holy crap. No frame stuttering, no nothing. That's impressive. O3 wouldn't, I don't think the O3 did that. Just for the sake of science, we are gonna do an identical run with the O3 and the Goggles 2. But we'll see if she holds 50 through the whole area, including going behind the house. No, see, little drop there. Little drop there. Whereas the O4 held 60, which is a higher bit rate. We'll do it again. We'll just kind of sit down here like we did with the O4, and we start to see a drop. Oh, pretty substantial drop. 35. I mean, it's still perfectly usable, but it's definitely getting knocked. Whereas with the O4, it just kind of held on. Let's do this. Let's fly up the road. That's the next challenge. We go up the road here, and in my experience, we normally would start seeing some dropped bit rate around here. It would start dropping from like 50 to like 35. And then there we go. First time it started dropping, okay. And then as we come around this turn here, there's a feature of the terrain that means the bit rate gets super bad as if I stay low and don't punch out. Let's see how we do. Okay, 25, 28, holy, that's the best that's ever done. And again, we'll try and mimic those conditions as well as possible, the same conditions as consistently as possible. But there's always going to be some variance. And we're already seeing a drop down to 40 here on this section of the road, whereas with the O4, we didn't start to see it drop until we got like closer up to here. It just held 60 all the way through until we got to about here. Now, here, how low are we going to get? See, we're already down to 35, 26, right? Right about here is where it should get real bad. Yep, dropping down to the orange right here, 13, okay? As we come over this little crest here is where it breaks apart. That's pretty impressive. Okay, there we go. Now it's getting bad. Now we're going to climb out. Oh, okay. And boom, right back up. Okay, and here we go. Oh yeah, see, it's already dropping. 10, 7, 5, right? And I can feel little micro stutters in the controls, whereas even though the bit rate, here, now we'll climb out, we'll see if it recovers. See, and here, with the O4, when we got to here, it jumped right back up to 30, 40, 60. I don't remember the exact number, but we're still barely holding in at 28, 30. There we go. Now we have enough altitude, we're gonna get it back. It's happening very smoothly. The way that it's degrading feels smoother than the O3. Like, it's not becoming stuttery like the O3 would. The bit rate would get low and the frame rate would get super stuttery. But here, the bit rate's getting low and it's getting blocky, which I'm not saying is a good thing, but it still feels very smooth and very flyable. Whereas before you'd start seeing a slideshow and you'd be like, well, I hope it's good enough. That's like probably the biggest difference I'm noticing right now between the O3 and the O4 and walk snail as well. And that's massive. Yeah. So same thing here. If I get low enough, there are terrain features that start to make it drop out, but it's just definitively doing better than anything that came before it in terms of stability of the link, in terms of the bit rate that it's holding. That's so impressive. So impressive. Wow. From now on, I'm going to change this setting. I'm going to go into settings, camera, color is going to be set to D-log. Oh, color display assist off. Oh, it's applying a LUT. Okay. Interesting. Wow, that's new. So if you set the color to log color, which is what you're going to do, it's like a washed out color that helps with color grading. But then it looks like shit when you fly with it because it's all washed out. But hey, you know, you got to do what you got to do. They have the ability to enable essentially what they call it is color display assist. But what it's essentially doing is loading a LUT. Presumably it's loading a LUT in the goggles only, and it's not baking that into the footage so that you can see a nice contrasty image, even though what's being recorded is low contrast. That's very, very cool. It's always tempting when I do these review videos to not just review the new product, the O4 Air unit that's just been released, but to also give a whole bunch of information to people out there who I know are going to be experiencing this product and this product line for the very first time. Things like, how do you do the FCC or ham unlock to get the full output power and the full amount of channels from the Air unit? How do you connect the Air unit to a flight controller? How do you set up Betaflight to get Betaflight working with the Air unit? It's so tempting to put that stuff in this video, but I'm not going to do it. And the reason I'm not going to do it is because I have all that stuff in my beginner build series. My beginner build series is a series of videos. It's about 4 hours of content total that teaches you everything you need to know to take a pile of parts that you ordered, take them out of the box, throw them on the bench, and then put them all together and into a quadcopter and configure it and fly it. And one of the segments of that video series is how to set up an O3 Air unit. And it turns out that setting up the O4 Air unit is exactly the same. Yes, the O4 has some features that are different that we're talking about in this video, but all of that stuff I just talked about is exactly the same. So if you are going to get an O4 Air unit and you're like, well, what do I do with it now? Check out the link in my video description below to my beginner build series. I'll link the whole playlist. And in addition, I'll link the specific video where we talk about wiring up and configuring the O3 Air unit. O4 Air, O3, O4, same thing. Okay, I'm curious what happens if we change transmission to racing mode. So it's kicked us to 4.3. It's kicked us to 20 megahertz bandwidth. That's good because for racing, we want to have we don't want narrower channels to avoid interference. We've got the standard race band frequencies. It doesn't do auto selection anymore, so presumably it's not automatically hopping the frequencies around. We can manually set the transmission power to 25 milliwatts and fine tune. Shut up. That means that the DJI is not going to be jumping around and screwing up your timing system. Holy crap. Yeah, I can definitely see a reduction in image quality compared to 60 megabits per second, but I mean, duh, right? Is it better than analog? I don't know, you decide. I mean, obviously it's better than analog. That's a stupid question. I mean, should I try to actually race with it? I don't have race gates set up, and I'm just going to be straight with you. I'm not going to set them up for this. This is max up tilt that the AOS will give. Give me a second to get adjusted to it. I mean, it feels pretty goddamn good. Way better than the O3. Holy shit. I mean, I'm not a great racer, but oof, let's tighten that up, buddy. I feel like this is legit. Oh, I forgot my line. I'm not legit, but this is legit. Oof, oof. That's something. You know, DJI makes all these claims about how racing mode works, like how the channels work and how the output power works. And it just occurred to me, we could use a spectrum analyzer to investigate some of those claims. So right here on the bench, I've got my Tiny SA Ultra Spectrum Analyzer, and it's like a $200 portable spectrum analyzer. It's not going to give the same precision and capabilities as a full-fledged lab-grade spectrum analyzer, but it's going to be good enough for our purposes. I'll put a link down in the video description below if you want to pick one up. If you've got like $200 to spend on a piece of hobby equipment, it's like gives a lot of insights into what's going on in the RF space that you wouldn't have any other way. The Tiny SA is set to show 5.6 gigahertz here on the left side of the screen, and then going all the way up in frequency to 6.0 gigahertz, which is basically the frequency range used by 5.8 gigahertz FPV systems. And right now, we're basically seeing nothing. The goggles are turned on, and if I put the goggles next to the antenna, we really just don't see anything at all, which I guess is a finding in and of itself, because like walk snail goggles will transmit at full power the whole time, even when the video transmitter is powered down. But DJI hasn't historically done that, and it looks like they still don't. By the way, the goggles that I'm using here are the G3, but I think we can assume that the other ones work similarly, if not exactly the same, when used with the O4 Air unit. So now let's go ahead and power up the O4 Air unit. But I'm really curious if it is actually like not transmitting at full power, and if I like go further away, will the power increase to try to compensate, or is it truly at fixed power? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the goggles, I'm going to take the quadcopter and I'm going to walk away with it, and I'm going to like walk outside, and we're going to see if this appears to change at all. Is it really at a fixed power, or is that like the maximum, but if it's close together, it'll be like, nah, I'm going to stay low. So I'll be right back. And what I see happening here is that as I walk away, the output power decreases and basically never changes. In other words, we don't see it like hop back up again when I go out of the room. We don't see any indication of dynamic power. We just see that it gets weaker and weaker and weaker until finally I go upstairs and I put it in the refrigerator, which is my big metal box that I use when I want to make an RF device work extra hard or be shielded. And it sure seems like the output power is fixed. And that's good, because especially in the racing mode, fixed output power means that it'll work correctly with the timing systems that people are using. Now we have got the DJI N2 goggles, and we're going to see how they behave differently, if at all. Obviously, there's some differences in the screens and stuff. That's not what we're going to focus on. We're just going to focus on the compatibility and options. Obviously, everything looks the same in terms of the output from the goggles. If we go to transmission, I'm curious. So racing mode is there. We have the option to set the transmission power and the channel mode. If we go to manual, bandwidth, we do have the 60 megabit per second mode, so they seem to support all of those features. And then in settings and camera, video quality, 4K 60. Oh, but that's because we got to go to 16.9. Yeah, go to 16.9. Yeah, so it's all there. It all seems the same. Now I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, Bardwell, the N3 goggles have 60 hertz screens, so how can they possibly do a 100 hertz frame rate? I'm being told that you weren't wondering that. Well, you should be wondering that, because it's true. If you have a 60 hertz screen, it cannot display a 100 hertz signal. Some of those frames have to be discarded. And the way that it works is, just like with the G3, the G2, the Integra, if you have a 100 hertz screen in the goggle and you're doing a 120 hertz frame rate, the Air unit records the full 120 frames a second, but it only sends half the frames to the goggle and you get 60 hertz. With the N3 goggles, if you're doing a 100 hertz or a 120 hertz frame rate, you can record that on the Air unit, but it only sends half the frames to the goggle. So you're only going to get 50 hertz or 60 hertz, and presumably there will be increased latency associated with that. You can see, well, you could see back when DJI reported the latency, that when you switched from 100 hertz to 60 hertz mode, the latency went up. We would have to put that on the bench and measure the latency to find out, and I'm just going to save that for Mads Tech to do. We've got to leave something for him, right? So the takeaway is that although the N3 goggles do on paper support all of the enhanced modes, the higher frame rates, the racing mode, and so forth, they are not going to give you the full advantage of the reduced latency compared to the G3. Although they will give you the reduced output power and the correct frequencies, so there is some advantage to putting these goggles in racing mode, just not the full advantage. What about the Goggles 2 and presumably the Integra, although I don't have the Integra? We go to transmission here. Okay, so we do not have the racing mode, which gives us the low latency and the other racing specific features. We do have the ability to set the transmission power. And in channel mode, we do not have the 60 megahertz, so we don't get 60 megabits per second. And finally, the aircraft processor is overheating. The 04 is overheating, although I've been sitting here for a half hour, so that's pretty freaking good with no air cooling or anything. And now it's shut down. Okay, that's your compatibility test. It feels like with the 04 Air unit that DJI have done what they are so good at doing, which is deliver a new generation of the product that is in some ways just kind of like a solid incremental step up from the previous product, but then also do a few things that people have been begging them to do for a long time, a few things that nobody anticipated they would do that you freaking love, and a few things that really freaking piss you off. And in the interest of allaying the accusations of being a DJI shill, let's start with the things they did that really piss you off. And the main thing that they've done that's going to piss you off is the form factor. So the shape of the Air unit is okay, but the shape of the camera, well, frankly, the shape of the camera is, I want to say enraging, which feels like it's too strong of a word, but it kind of is. This camera is not going to fit in a lot of frames. And again, this is a problem that is going to be solved in 4 to 6 months. Well, probably iFlight's going to release new versions of their frames for the 04, like the day that this video comes out, because that's how the 03 went. But at least for now, it's freaking annoying. And if you've got a quadcopter out there that you want to just drop an 04 in, you're going to be improvising or buying a new frame or doing a new build. And that's, frankly, well, enraging is too strong of a word, but it certainly is annoying at the very least. Another thing that traditionally pisses people off about DJI products is that DJI pilots kind of just, they just power on and they rely on DJI's auto frequency management algorithm to avoid, well, to avoid shitting on other people? No, mostly to avoid them getting shit on, and sometimes that causes them to knock people out of the air, especially people flying analog or HD0. And that is no different with this than with any other, although the ability to manually lock your power is very, very nice. That's something we had with the Vista. We lost with the 03 and now we have it back. And the ability to manually lock your channels. And I would like to encourage people who are getting into this system to watch my video about FPV channel interference best practices, how to avoid interfering with other people who you're flying with and screwing up their video, making them crash their drones. I'll put a link to that in the video description below, as well as a little pop-out card. As soon as you're done watching this video, you could go check that one out if you don't already know how to do that. As far as performance goes, it feels like the 04 Air unit is a solid step up from the 03, but not really like game-changingly different. Like the nominal range that DJI gives is 15 kilometers for the 04 and 10 kilometers for the 03, which suggests a 50% increase in range. Obviously, I haven't done any long-distance range testing, but it doesn't feel like it's quite like that. But it does feel like the 04 is solidly better than the 03. Number one, in that 60 megabit per second compared to 50 megabit per second gives just a little better image detail, especially when you're like diving into some place with fine details like grass and branches and stuff. It's just a little better at detecting scraggle, which is a place where DJI's compression has traditionally been weak compared to things like analog and HD0. If you're interested in picking up an 04 Air unit, please use one of the affiliate links in the video description below. Go down to the video description, expand it, find the links to the stores, and click those links before you make your purchase. What that does is give me a little commission. That's how the affiliate marketing works these days. You click the link, you make a purchase, I get a % of the purchase. It doesn't cost you anything extra. It just means the vendor gives that money to me instead of keeping it for themselves. And I think we all agree that's what we'd like to do. Clicking those affiliate links is the easiest way for you to support the channel. It doesn't cost you anything. It just costs you the time of finding the affiliate link. And frankly, you can just bookmark an affiliate link to your favorite stores and click it before you go shopping. And then you just give me a little %. It adds up. It really does add up. It means a lot. If you want to learn more about the 04 Air unit, I'm going to put all my videos about it, at least all the ones in the near future, into a playlist. Some of the things that I've got coming up are the build of this quadcopter and the test flying of this quadcopter. So you want to find out about, well, you know how the 04 works, but now you can find out about the whole rest of it, as well as testing the race, the little 04 Lite, whatever we're calling it, video transmitter, taking it to a race and testing out race mode, and who knows what else I'll think of. That's all going to be in a playlist. I'll put a card on screen to that playlist. You can check those videos out as well. I'll put a card on screen to the channel interference best practices video that I referred to earlier. And I'll see you there.